Hey Stan, can you get this TV it's on, but it's not on. I can't see the picture. Well, good morning. We're going to jump right in. I want you to imagine that you're standing out in the middle of a field with Jesus. He's not on the stage, and there's not like this. It's just you and him. And he bends down, and you're like, what is he doing? And he picks something up, and he's rubbing it between his fingers. And he turns to you, and he says, what do you think God's kingdom should look like? How do you think God's kingdom should work? I think if we could design a kingdom, if we could design the way that it functions and the way that it works, we would probably expect something very obvious, something very strong, something very immediate, something that you would look at and it would be unmistakable what you're looking at, something that announces itself. And instead, Jesus, he shows you something that's almost laughable in its size. He shows you something that's so small that you can barely hang on to it. It would slip between, you be careful, if you're not careful, it's going to slip between your fingers. And he doesn't say anything, but he just shows that to you. And you think, could God really choose something this small? Is this really how his kingdom would begin? If so, how many times have I missed it? If it's that small. What if we've been waiting for power and God has been planting seeds? And then Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Today we're going to be in the same chapter of Matthew that we've been looking at this quarter so far, Matthew 13. And we're going to be looking at two very short, connected parables from that gospel. The mustard seed and the leaven. And so before we jump in, let's again remember who Jesus is. He's a Jewish rabbi. He's speaking to first century Jews. He's speaking to a Jewish audience, and that's why I'm choosing Matthew and I'm hammering Matthew, is because who's Matthew writing to? Right. And so Matthew is a Jew writing to Jews. He's writing about a Jewish rabbi who was at the time teaching Jews. And that matters. Because the Jewish audience, they don't just hear words. They hear layers. One of the ways that the Jewish tradition has understood Scripture is through something, let me just get to that, something they call pardes. And I wanted to take just a moment this morning to talk about pardes for just a few minutes, because this is something that was just built into their brains of how they looked at when they heard these stories, and they were taught by a rabbi. The word pardes comes from a word that literally means orchard or garden. And the idea was that there's this rich, layered landscape that takes place in understanding. Each one of these letters in Pardes, it represents a layer, a level of interpretation. And so let's talk about them for just a moment. The P stands for Peshat. Peshat. Peshat simply means a simple, a plain, a surface level meaning, a direct meaning, what the text plainly says in its historical and its grammatical context. What does it say? That would be a Peshat understanding. At a Peshat level, the goal is to understand the text as its original audience might have. Peshat avoids metaphor unless the text is clearly signaling a metaphor, even when meaning seems obvious to us. Peshat can still require careful study of language and context. Who's seen the movie Shrek? It's an old cartoon from 20 years ago. He says he's an ogre, and he has a line in that movie that he says ogres are complicated. They're like onions, and his friend says they stink, and he says no, layers. They're like layers. Onions have layers, and this is kind of what the Jewish. And so as I go through these layers, I just want to stress that this is not saying that there's one level is superior to the next. This is not about choosing a level and going with that. This is about digging and uncovering deeper meaning and deeper truth in text. If you have a Peshat understanding of a text, that's great. And that it's not saying that Peshat is inferior. But there are these different understandings that that an ancient Near Eastern Jew would take away. The second, the R. So Peshat was a plain, simple meaning. The R is called the Remez, and the Remez is a hint or an allusion that is made in the text. Remez looks for these simple clues. Okay. These clues that are intentional, the clues the rabbi has intentionally stuck and buried in the parable, they're beneath the surface. Troy, in his class over Jonah, he talked about the Remez. He called them hyperlinks. You may remember him saying, you know how when you get an email and there's like a blue line in there, and you can go and click on that, and it takes you to another website or something? And we call that a hyperlink. And that's what the Remez would be, okay? These are things buried in the text that point to other passages in the Bible. And they may not be really clear to us sometimes because, honestly, we're just not as good of Bible students. We haven't memorized the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, like they have. But a lot of these things are buried, and it would obviously stick out. Maybe a word is used, and that word is only used one other time in the Hebrew Bible, and it would just point them to that other text. Maybe it's talking about creation or the flood or some other major text, and that's called the Remez. It might be a word that's been specifically put in there. It might be a repetition of something they just keep hammering over and over again. It could be a number, excuse me, a number that is stuck in there, and that number is a weird number that's only used one other time, and it would point them back to this other text. It might be symbolism. So just for example, a repeated word or an unusual phrase or something like that would be considered Remez. A hyperlink. It would be something that points you back to something else. Another level of interpretation is called the Darash. The Darash is, and I'm not going to give you a quiz over these, and we won't even probably use these words again. These are just kind of FYI. The Darash is metaphor, comparison, illustration through teaching. This is the interpretive. this is the application. This is, how does what I'm reading apply to me now? This is another level of that understanding. This would be something that would be a big part of rabbinic teachings. Who's heard of the Midrash? Anybody heard of that? The Midrash. This is not a Jewish text. This is a rabbinical teaching where they have taken a Jewish Hebrew scriptures from the Old Testament and have rabbinic teachings in Judaism about these, teaching moral lessons, bringing something forward and applying it into today. Okay, so at this level, interpreters may compare verses. They may resolve contradictions or perceived contradictions. They may draw out a broader principle. Now, Darash, this level, does not ignore the literal meaning. It builds upon that, okay? And it answers larger questions about life and about law and spirituality. And then finally, you have the Sod level. Sod level, we're not going to be focusing a lot on Sod level. Sod level is something that is kind of a mysterious or a hidden meaning in the text. I'm going to try to kind of point out some things at times that could be kind of a Sod takeaway, something that is kind of hidden, not hidden in the sense of, I guess when I say hidden, I'm talking about something that we have to really dig and study and really, dig out of what this text is teaching. It's not something that's going to be just completely obvious from reading it through, simply just reading the words one time. You're not going to just get that away from it. Okay? All right, so that's a lot. So we're not going to harp on this, but just to kind of summarize, Peshat is kind of what's literally true about that. Remez is what it's suggesting, what it's pointing us to in the text. Darash, you get into this community. How does it impact our community? How can we apply this today? And then Sod kind of talks about things that are just mystically, that word is kind of a weird word to use, but something that is a very deep truth that can be dug out of that if we study it enough. All right, so I give you all of that because we're going to talk today about a very short parable, and we're going to, it's not a lot of reading, but we're going to kind of look at these different levels in this text and see if any of these things are, if it kind of holds true or not, okay? So, just to summarize, Pardes, I show this to you, it's not about choosing one correct meaning. It's about recognizing that all four of these levels are coexisting together, okay? A single verse can be literally true, but it can also have the symbolism and suggest other things by pointing us to other passages. And it can also be ethically instructive for us today. We can bring it forward into today and apply it to us in 2026. And it can also be mystically profound. So it's not about one being superior over the other. Don't take that away. But I'm saying if you have a Peshat level, that is somehow, not a good thing. Peshat is a really, literally looking at what it says is a great, is a great understanding to have. All right, so the point of all of that is that this layered approach emphasizes the idea that the Hebrew Bible is infinitely rich. It is always offering new insights depending on how deeply you want to explore it. And we don't, it's not good to always stop at the very first thing we see. We need to turn that text over and over again. And we need to continually wrestle with it and continually ask, am I hearing what they would have heard? How does that apply to me today? And so we're going to start with Matthew 13. We're going to read verses 31 through 33. That's the parable of the the leaven and the mustard seed first, and then the leaven. So let's start with the mustard seed. This is Matthew 13. We're going to read verse 31 and verse 32. He put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches." That's it. This is about the third week in a row we've heard a parable about a man who goes and sows seed in his field, right? This is the same agricultural, and it occurs in the same chapter that we've been in. He's telling these agricultural parables that tell very different things about the kingdom. All right, and so let's start by looking at the surface level. What does this literally say about God's kingdom? Anybody want to, just from a surface literal reading of what he says, what is God's kingdom going to be like? Okay? It's going to be like a seed, right? All right. I think Betty nailed it. The literal, the peshat, the literal straightforward message is that God's kingdom, it starts small and it becomes big. It becomes very big. That's true. Jesus, he says mustard seeds are very small. He says they're the smallest of all seeds, and some people have taken issue with that because we know that mustard seeds are not the smallest seed in existence. But that's not the point of what Jesus is making here. It's not the point he's making. He's not speaking scientifically. He's using a very common rabbinic proverb talking about the mustard seed. When he says it's the smallest of all seeds, he's saying it's a very small seed. He's using a very common expression from that time. Mustard seeds were very common to them. They understood that this was a very tiny seed. And it was often referred to when they were talking about something and comparing it to something very small. This would be a statement Jesus is making here that would be very relatable, very impactful. They wouldn't have said, well, technically the mustard seed is not the smallest seed in existence. That they would have understood what he's doing there, right? He's saying it is small, a very tiny thing. It is tiny. And a mustard seed does grow very large in comparison to what it starts off as. We might say that there is a lot of potential packed into something that is seemingly insignificant. I mean, you could blow it off your finger. It's so small. That would be a very true, very peshat takeaway from this story. That's a literal, straightforward meaning. But it's also important to know that a first century listener, they wouldn't stop there because they would be very, very familiar with the mustard plant. And they would, when Jesus says mustard seed, his audience would already have that category in mind of exactly what he's talking about. I honestly don't have any mustard growing around that I know about in my property or anything. But his audience would be very familiar with this. And they would know a few things about a mustard seed. They would know that it's not a tree. Mustard is a very fast-growing, very invasive bush. I put in a search, find me a picture of the largest mustard plant that you can find. And I gave that assignment, And this is the one that they showed me. That's pretty big. That you could almost say that's a tree. It is, but it's not a tree, and this would not be what they would be familiar with. Mustard is a shrub. It is a very fast-growing. It's very invasive, and that brings up something else. It's not cultivated. Nobody would plant mustard seed on their property. Mustard seed, mustard bush is considered a noxious weed. Nobody would purposefully plant mustard seed in their garden. The mustard seed was very common, and it was always found out growing wildly in the middle of like a field. And so the idea that somebody would plant this, a man would go out and he would plant this mustard seed. Jesus, when he told that story, they would just kind of be like, that's very weird. That's a very weird statement to make. And the last thing is they would know that this spreads very aggressively. Once you have mustard seed growing, you can burn it, you can poison it, you can chop it up, you can dig it up. You can do whatever you want to do to this, and you cannot get rid of it. The root system of a mustard plant is immense. It gets intertwined with everything around it, and it just takes over. You cannot get rid of it. So when Jesus says a man goes out, and he says, a man goes out and he plants this mustard in his garden, they would have laughed. Some of you have very well-kept lawns. Like, you almost have a problem we need to talk about. I'm just kidding. But you know what I'm talking about. Every blade of grass, it looks like a putting green. You walk up there, and the bushes are trimmed beautifully. And your beds look just immaculate. And what if somebody came out in the middle of that and started planting bamboo shoots? I don't know a lot about bamboo, but bamboo is an aggressive, it takes over. You know, this would be worse than just planting some crabgrass and that. That'd be kind of irritating. But what if somebody came and they just destroyed it? Because you'll never get rid of that. No matter what you do, you're going to have to dig up the earth, basically, around it. You would say, why would you do that? And the point is that gardens in the ancient world, not that different from our gardens today. They were ordered. They were intentionally laid out. They were controlled and well kept. And planting mustard there would be like just introducing chaos on purpose. And Jesus says that is how his kingdom is going to be. His kingdom will not stay contained. It will take over. And he pushes it even further. He says, that mustard seed, you know that mustard seed that man planted? You know that mustard seed that should become this bush that's irritating? It's going to become a tree. And many believe that he's using hyperbole here intentionally. That he is intentionally exaggerating in order to wake people up and get their attention. He's not teaching a botany lesson here. He is completely disrupting their expectations. He's saying, my kingdom is not going to be like anything you could dream up. My kingdom is unpredictable. My kingdom is counterintuitive. It doesn't even work like you think it will work. And that's what an ancient Near Eastern Jew would immediately understand on a surface level, on that Peshat understanding. And so, let's talk for just a moment about that remez. Remember the remez? The hyperlinks, right? The things that stick out in the story that you go, that reminds me of this. And we all do that, right? We do that in Bible class all the time. I hear you doing it all the time where the person up here is making a point and you say, well, that sounds a lot like, how does that apply to, think about this passage over here and bring that into it, and that we do that all the time. And that's what they would do with the Hebrew Scriptures. They would think back and they would pull out these hyperlinks. And again, because they know their Bibles, they know those Hebrew Scriptures much better than I do. They had them memorized. And so some of these can be tough, and we have to dig, and there may be things that we just miss, and it takes more study, and we go, oh yeah, he was talking, and we do that all the time, don't we? When someone is speaking up here and they go, hey, he's actually talking, like in the Jonah class, that blew my mind when Troy taught that. When he says, he's pointing back to Genesis here, he's pointing back to, that kind of stuff. But let's talk about that for this parable. And I can give you one example of a remez, and that is the trees with birds nesting in them. That phrase is a very used phrase in the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to give you one place. It's mentioned many times, but I'm going to give you one place where you will remember this being used for sure, and that's in Daniel. Daniel chapter 4. Remember, King Nebuchadnezzar has that dream, and it startles him, and it makes him, he's worried about it, and he goes to all of his magicians and his wise men, and he says, he tries to find someone to interpret his dream. And we know the story. Who can interpret his dream? God gives Daniel the ability to do that. And this is, if you remember in chapter 4, it's kind of an unusual chapter because it's King Nebuchadnezzar himself. He says, I, King Nebuchadnezzar. He's talking, this is actually King Nebuchadnezzar's words. And he says this, I'm not going to read it all to you, but the visions of my head as I lay in bed were these. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens lived in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. Do you remember what Daniel tells him a little bit later? He says in verse 20 and 22, the tree you saw, which grew and became strong so that its top reached to the heaven, it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit and abundant, and in which was food for all, under which beasts of the field found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O King, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. And so there are actually a lot of passages about this where you see trees representing kingdoms and providing shelter to nations. Okay, whether it's Babylon or Assyria, you have this common understanding of trees representing kingdoms, and where the nations represent the birds that have come and for protection in its branches. Okay, so we're not going to go into this too deeply, but these are the kind of things that We already are aware of this. We do this all with our Bibles now. But this is something that would be very... now, think about this. Does knowing that make that parable richer? It does. When you are able to understand that he's talking about a kingdom, he's talking about nations and about people and people finding protection under its branches. It's not that having that Peshat level was inadequate. It was that this other stuff makes it deeper and richer, and we come to we never stop growing. We always continue learning and getting a richer understanding of what's being taught. And because I'm in 2026 and not as great of a Bible student as they were, I'm going to miss some of those remezes. And if you see them, point them out to me, because these are things that are not super on the surface. These are things that we go, oh, and maybe sometimes it's a number, and we go, well, that's a weird number to have there. And you look back, and it's like only used one other time, and it was talking about this, or whatever it is. But point those things out, because every time you do that, whether it's in a Bible class or just in a conversation, we're growing in the deepness of how we understand this. So that's the only reason I was pointing that out. Okay, so let's look at the broader application. These are broader principles that we can apply to us and now that we can understand about God's kingdom. Okay, the overarching message, we might say, of what Jesus is teaching. Things that we learn about God's kingdom. Well, the kingdom, it starts small. You could say it's almost invisible. It's, that little mustard seed is nearly, you're going to miss that if you're not looking very specifically for it. You could miss that. It's almost invisible. It looks insignificant. Looks laughable even. It moves into places that we might look at that and say it shouldn't be there. It moves into places it shouldn't be, in our opinion. It disrupts the order. It disrupts sometimes the order that we might be trying to maintain. It might make us uncomfortable to see it growing in places that we say, wow, it would never grow there. And once it takes root, you can't stop it. It doesn't grow like an empire. It grows like a weed. It grows uncontrollable, persistent, unstoppable, unpredictable, counterintuitive, and somehow in that wild, unexpected growth, it becomes a place of refuge. I'm not going to spend in this class a lot of time on that last interpretive level, that sowed, that hidden. But it's something that takes a great deal of time and a great deal of thought and study, and it can take a great deal longer to come up with sowed understanding than it can. It might take a lifetime with some texts of wrestling with it. The mustard seed, we've talked about that it represents something almost invisible, the hidden presence almost of God that is already at work. And that the kingdom is what we might say kind of the hidden, or the underneath, very deep underneath that is that the kingdom is not coming externally, it's planted within, and it's growing in ways that cannot be fully seen or controlled. So the difference there is that the Darash says the kingdom is not what you expected it to be. The Sod says the kingdom is deeper and nearer than you ever realized. Any thoughts or questions about that? Is it too early in the morning? Okay, all right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
ability to prosper, and in spite of the best efforts that you can't
that's a good point. And it's a lot like leaven, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. And you know, that idea of Peshat, that surface level, I think we have to be really careful, because that means surface level for what they understood. It doesn't mean a surface level reading of me taking a 2026 word and applying it to a word that looks maybe similar in their scriptures, and saying, well, it means this today. That word means this today, so it obviously meant that then. That's not Peshat. That's something else that I don't even know what the name for that is. Peshat is having a surface level understanding of what they would have understood. So that takes work, doesn't it? That's not simply a literal, it's not a literal reading for what I think it means in 2026. So that's a big difference that we might want to parse out there a little bit. It's not what do I think in 2026 that word means. That's what takes a little work. So even a Peshat level understanding, it takes some study. So in verse 33, does anybody else have any questions or anything or thoughts? Okay. In verse 33, it says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. The end. That's the parable. He tells this 2 very short, we might say almost too simple parable. And he says the kingdom of heaven here is like leaven. And I want to point out a couple things in our time that's remaining, but I want to point out that word leaven to them would not be a neutral term. They would hear the word leaven, and they would be immediately reminded of Exodus, the Passover. Leaven was associated with something that you were to remove. It represented impurity to them. You were to remove that for the Passover. And I'm not going to read all these to you because I know you know this. In their sacrifices, when they would do their grain offerings, they were to remove the leaven. They were not to make those with leaven. To them, leaven would not be something that was a positive thing, okay? I put this on here. Jesus, what does he say about the Pharisees? He says, beware of their leaven, right? He's not talking about something great here. He's talking about something negative. So leaven, Jesus, when he says leaven, he's creating a tension immediately by using that word. It has a negative connotation to them. And again, he's being hyperbolic in a sense of trying to get their attention by creating this tension of, what? Wait a minute, what? And it would make them perk up and listen. And that discomfort is the point. It's that point of he's trying to make them uncomfortable by using something. And so let's just quickly, not very different from the mustard seed. These are very similar, so let's just run through them quickly. On a Peshat level, leaven works quietly, right? It works invisibly. What does leaven do? When you put it in a large lump, and you put in a little bit of leaven, what's it do? It works through the whole thing, doesn't it? Can you unleaven that dough? When it gets in there, you're not getting it out. The bread is leavened. And I just wanted to point, we're running out of time, so I'm kind of jumping through this kind of quick. But I wanted to point out a hyperlink I think is really cool. He says that, and that's the 3 measures of flour. It's like, what does he do? Why does he say 3? Everything is intentional when a rabbi is telling a parable. And this parable is very short. And he's saying this because he knows that they would think about Genesis. And in Genesis chapter 18, there's another time, and we all know this story. Abraham looks up. He sees 3 men, right? And he recognizes that they are not men. They are not just men. And he tells Sarah, quick, make 3 seahs of fine flour, okay? Knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good. He gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So 3 measures of flour, even 3 seahs of flour, this is a massive amount of flour, okay? This is enough to feed a large crowd. This is like 40 to 50 pounds of flour, okay? And that's remez. For a Jewish listener, the 3 measures of flour would echo Genesis 18. It would serve as a remez that he's not just talking about baking. He's talking about, they would equate that leaven with abundance, with hospitality, and most importantly, they would equate it with God showing up. And so I thought that was a really cool remez, and there may be some other ones in there, but that 3, it's like, why does he pick 3 measures of flour? Why does he do that? Well, the only other place that's used is in Genesis chapter 18, when you see Sarah making bread for the visitors. Okay, so as we move into the broader application, the kingdom doesn't arrive the way people expect, okay? The leaven, it represents the influence of the kingdom in everyday life, even a small expression of God's kingdom. Truth, righteousness, obedience, even a small expression, it spreads and it impacts everything around it, okay? All right, and so Jesus, he stacks these parables intentionally, talking about small beginnings becoming massive outcomes. Hidden work becomes inevitable transformation, and patience becoming trust in God's process. Okay, we're done. But these parables answer a real question. If the kingdom is here, why doesn't it look like it sometimes? And Jesus answers it. He answers it in a very deeply Jewish manner. He says, because this is how God works. And this is how God has always worked. His reign doesn't arrive by force. It begins small and enters ordinary life quietly and unexpectedly. And so the question shouldn't be, where is God's kingdom? Maybe a better question is, have I overlooked it? Because it didn't look how I thought it should look. Let's go to God in prayer as we close. Father, we thank you so much for this Lord's Day. We thank you for this time that we get to be together. Father, we're so grateful for your love, and we're grateful for Jesus. We're just so thankful, and we pray that you will help us to be good students of his word and always be willing to dig out these nuggets, looking for ways that we can be more like him. And we pray that you will continue to bless us, Father, and be with us today as we go into our worship now. It's in your Son, Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.